3, 2, 1.
The year was 1961. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a massive Cold War, and America was falling behind in the nuclear arms race. The missile gap was thought to be widening. Therefore, the U.S. needed a new kind of nuclear missile, one that would be ready to launch at a moment's notice. The answer was the solid-fueled Minuteman Missile. The Minuteman gave the United States of America nuclear superiority.
Wait a minute, stop the picture. What's a Cold War? What's a nuclear missile? And why did they call it Minuteman?
Psst. Hey, kid.
Huh?
Hey, look over here. Come on into the Launch Control Center. I can answer your questions.
How do I get in?
Oh, that's easy.
Whoa! What is this place?
This, my friend, is the Minuteman Launch Control Center. I believe you had some questions?
Well, the guy in the film said something about a Cold War. What's a Cold War?
Well, I suppose you know what a hot war is, don't you?
I guess it would be a war where two countries are fighting and shooting at each other.
Right you are. If a hot war is something where two countries are actually fighting and shooting at each other, what do you suppose a Cold War is?
Well, I guess it's a war where two countries are fighting and not shooting at each other.
That's right. The Cold War was basically a war of ideas that led to mutual fear and distrust. It involved a buildup of military might, but no actual shooting.
So why wasn't there ever any shooting?
Well, there's an old saying that says, a bulldog can lick a skunk any day, but it's just not worth it.
Huh?
Well, don't you think a bulldog can kill a skunk if it wants to?
Sure, he's a lot bigger and stronger.
Well, then why doesn't he?
Because the dog knows he'll get sprayed and smell bad for a long time.
Well, that was kind of the same situation between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. They had enough weapons to destroy us, but they didn't use them because they knew they would get hurt too.
But why were the two countries enemies in the first place?
The confrontation was really between two completely different forms of government and economic systems.
Economic systems?
Yes, ways of doing business and producing goods and services. In communism, the government controls the whole economy by owning all the factories and the farms. All citizens get paid the same no matter how hard they work. There are no incentives to work harder or smarter because you know you'll always get the same pay for your efforts.
That's not fair. Couldn't the people do anything to change it?
I'm afraid not. People in communist nations are limited on what they are allowed to say or do. The individual has very limited rights, and they are not free to make their own choices. At one point, citizens of communist Russia couldn't even leave the country.
But in the United States, people have freedom, right?
Yes, the U.S. government is based on democracy, which means we vote for leaders in free elections, and our freedoms are protected by the Bill of Rights. Our economy follows the same idea and is called free enterprise or capitalism. We can buy, sell, and do business with anyone with limited government interference.
But that still doesn't explain why the two countries are enemies.
After World War II, the Soviet Union occupied a number of countries in Eastern Europe and forced them to have communist governments. In 1950, China became communist too, with the help of the Soviet Union. It started to look like the whole world was going to be forced into communism. The United States was the main country standing in their way because we wanted to protect our freedom and way of life from the communists. So we began a massive buildup of nuclear missiles.
What's a nuclear missile?
It's pronounced nuclear. Let's see, a missile is basically a high-powered rocket. Its job is to transport a nuclear weapon to a specific target. You know what a rocket is, don't you?
Yeah, like the bottle rockets I shoot off at 4th of July.
Exactly. Or perhaps you've seen someone launch a model rocket. Well, those are both solid-fueled missiles, just like the Minuteman. The big difference is that while these rockets have a loud pop at the end of their flight, the nuclear missile carries a warhead that explodes like thousands, even millions of tons of dynamite.
How big was the explosion?
Well, a conventional weapon using an explosive like dynamite can blow up a large building. But a nuclear weapon can level a whole city, and enough of them can destroy a whole country with the explosions and the radiation that they leave behind. The other difference is that these missiles, being much larger, can travel at speeds up to 15,000 miles per hour and can deliver a nuclear warhead to their target over 6,000 miles away in about the time it takes to watch your favorite cartoon show, about 30 minutes.
Wow, that is fast. Is that why it was called the Minuteman?
Did I tell you that the Minuteman was a huge advance in our nuclear capability? Here's an example of two missiles. This is the Titan missile. It was a liquid propellant. The fuels in it were very corrosive and required a great deal of maintenance, and it had to have a large launch crew. So why don't you hold that? Okay, this is a Minuteman. It was a solid propellant, required very little maintenance. It could be placed in its silo and left for months or years and be completely reliable.
So when the enemy launched their missiles at us, Minutemen could shoot them right out of the sky.
No, it didn't work that way. The Minuteman was very accurate, but it couldn't do that. Our missiles were mostly aimed at the Soviet military bases and missile sites, and the whole purpose was to have enough missiles ready to launch at the Soviets so they wouldn't think of striking first.
Oh, kind of like the story The Dog and the Skunk.
Just like that. An Air Force general put it best one time when he was asked by a U.S. senator.
General, just what is it you do out at Omaha?
That's the headquarters of the Strategic Air Command. The general replied,
Senator, I make sure that every day when the Soviets have their threat briefing, they conclude it by saying,
Not today, comrade. Not today.
In other words, he was saying that they could start a war with us, but we didn't want it to be easy for them. So we remained ready to fire back with everything we had. That's called deterrence. The word deter is kind of like detour. We wanted to turn the enemy away from thinking that they could launch missiles at us, so we were ready to fire back at them, and that deterred them from starting a war.
So if our missiles were targeted at their missiles, that means their missiles...
Very perceptive. They did have nuclear missiles aimed at our missile fields as well. In fact, we know now that the Soviets had a 10-megaton nuclear weapon aimed right at this facility.
Wow, weren't the people living around here scared of having all those nuclear weapons aimed at them?
I'm sure they were. In fact, all over the country, people tried to prepare for the nuclear war. Some people built fallout shelters in their backyard to protect them from the radiation that would come from nuclear weapons. Also, the government had a civil defense plan that taught school children like yourself to duck and cover when they heard the civil defense sirens go off.
But if one of those nuclear warheads went off nearby, it wouldn't help much to put your arms over your head, would it?
I'm afraid not. Nobody was safe. We hoped that our missiles would be a
deterrent!
That's right. We hoped our missiles would be a deterrent to the Soviets. They wouldn't want to pick a fight with a nuclear skunk.
So the Minutemen protected us. So why was it called Minuteman?
I thought you'd never ask. Actually, there were several reasons for this. First, the Minuteman was on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for nearly 30 years, out here in the South Dakota prairie. This helped us to end the Cold War by forcing the Soviets to spend so much for their military buildup that they went broke, and communism collapsed. This brought them to the bargaining table, where we negotiated a treaty that resulted in both countries reducing their stockpiles of nuclear weapons. That treaty, called START, was signed in 1991, and the missile silos here in South Dakota were destroyed in 1993.
So they were ready to go to battle all the time, and could be launched in just a few minutes.
Right. That's another reason for the name. But there's also a historical reason. During America's First War, that's the Revolutionary War, the Minutemen were farmers and businessmen who stood ready to fight and protect their homes and families now in a matter of minutes. The first battles they fought were Lexington and Concord.
But the Missileers never really went to war. So did they complete their mission?
They did complete their mission, because they helped make it unthinkable for the Soviets to ever start a war. Remember, not today, comrade. Not today. Well, son, are you ready to go back and watch the rest of the movie?
I guess so. Thanks for telling me all about the Minuteman. I've learned a lot. Say, who are you anyway?
I'm a missileer. I was one of the 2 Air Force officers who sat in this underground control room, ready to turn the keys to launch the missiles at a moment's notice. Now let's get back to the movie.
But how do I get back?
Well, the same way you got here, just like this.
Okay, I'm ready. Roll 'em!
In the words of one man who was involved in the Minuteman project, the Minuteman was one of the most significant strategic weapons in U.S. history. With the turn of a key, the missile could deliver its nuclear weapon to a Soviet target in 30 minutes or less. It was a weapon for which there was virtually no defense. For a war no one could win. For nearly 3 decades, Ellsworth's 44th Missile Wing stood on alert. Then, in 1989, the Berlin Wall fell.